I used to believe there were moments in life that made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. Those fleeting instances when you stand in the light, surrounded by applause, and realize that all the late nights, the quiet diligence, the times you stayed when everyone else left, finally meant something. That night, in a cozy little restaurant tucked away in downtown Seattle, warm string lights dancing overhead and laughter echoing from all directions, I thought it was going to be my moment. We were celebrating the company's quarterly success, and for 5 years I had given this place everything. Fixing messes no one else dared to touch, guiding new hires through the chaos, and never once asking for recognition. Harold, my boss, the same man who had dropped hints over the past few months that I was next in line for the director of engineering role, gently tapped his spoon against his wine glass. The room quieted like a theatre before curtain call. I adjusted the sleeve of the deep navy dress my daughter helped me pick, the one she said made me look strong and commanding. My heart pounded as Harold began to speak. But just a few sentences in, I knew. I wasn't the one being honoured tonight. My moment was never mine at all. Harold's voice was smooth, rehearsed, the kind of tone executives use when they know the audience is listening closely. He began speaking about remarkable contributions and outstanding performance. But as he went on, the words started to feel foreign, detached from the story I thought we were living. "It's rare," he said, "to find someone who makes this kind of impact in just 3 months." My smile froze, my hand tightening subtly around the stem of my wine glass. 3 months? I looked up slowly, heart sinking as Harold turned toward Amanda, the newest addition to our team, barely out of onboarding. "Amanda, your leadership, innovation, and poise have exceeded expectations. That's why I'm proud to announce your promotion to Director of Engineering." Applause erupted around the table. Chairs shifted, glasses clinked. I clapped too. Of course I did, because what else does one do when the moment you've imagined for years is handed to someone who doesn't yet know where the server room is? My body remained still, but something inside me cracked. Amanda, red-cheeked and overwhelmed, stood to accept the role with a soft laugh and a few modest words. She hadn't asked for this, I reminded myself, and perhaps that's what made it worse. That she didn't even expect it. While I had carried the weight of expectation for so long, it had reshaped my posture, my pace, even my voice. Harold turned back to me then, as if only just remembering I existed. "And of course, Evelyn," he said, his smile practiced and hollow, "we're so grateful for everything you do." That was it. No mention of the long nights I'd stayed back to finish critical updates when the servers crashed. No recognition of the new hire training programs I had developed on my own time, or the countless times I had de-escalated crises that could have cost the company clients. Just a generic thank you, delivered with the warmth of a vending machine receipt. I raised my glass slightly, the edge of it trembling near my lip as I forced a smile into place. "Amanda deserves it," I said, my voice steady despite the thundering inside my chest. "Truly." Harold nodded too quickly. "She does a lot more than you already, Evelyn. You should be taking notes." The laughter that followed didn't just come from him. A few others chuckled. Not out of malice, perhaps, but out of habit, out of hierarchy. Amanda looked horrified, her eyes darting from face to face as if she could pull the words back with sheer will. I wouldn't say that," she stammered, but the damage had already rippled through the air like a snapped thread. I laughed too, the kind of laugh that hurts behind the eyes, that only comes when your dignity demands you wear a mask while your soul crumples underneath. I smiled. I poured another glass. I made conversation. But every second I remained in that room, something inside me grew quiet and sharp. When the party ended and I stepped out into the crisp night air, the silence felt sacred. I didn't cry, didn't pace, didn't rant. Instead, I stood there for a long moment, looking up at the stars, letting the chill center me. Then I pulled out my phone, typed a brief message with steady fingers, and attached my resignation letter. Subject: Immediate resignation. Harold, please find attached my formal resignation, effective immediately. Evelyn. I stared at it for one breath, then hit send. A strange peace settled over me. Not the peace that comes from escape, but the kind that comes from clarity. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming something I had long been conditioned to give away without hesitation. My worth. And yet, I wasn't done. Because come Monday morning, Harold would find out exactly what happens when you build a company on the backs of people you refuse to see, and then act surprised when they finally walk away. The morning after the party, the office felt oddly unchanged. The same glass doors sliding open with a quiet hiss, the same hum of printers and chatter near the break room, the same forced pleasantries as co-workers sipped their coffee and swapped weekend plans. Yet, beneath that familiar rhythm, something had shifted inside me, something cold and clear, as if the betrayal had burned away all the fog I didn't know I was living in. I walked through the lobby with the same steady gait I'd always carried, greeted the receptionist by name, and offered a faint smile to the mail clerk who handed me a small package without looking up. Everything on the surface appeared normal, but inside I felt strangely calm. Not numb, not broken, just finished. There was a silence in me that no longer needed to be filled. Amanda was already at her desk, her smile brighter than usual, perhaps still soaking in the afterglow of applause and sudden authority. I didn't blame her truly. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but she hadn't stepped aside either. Still, the real betrayal didn't wear Amanda's name. It wore Harold's grin, the kind he used to flash in meetings when taking credit for my work became too easy to resist. That smile had been my warning all along, and I hadn't listened. I took my time settling in, carefully placing my bag by the side of my desk, powering up my computer, not because I had work to do, but because I wanted the moment to unfold on my terms. And right on cue, I heard it. The sharp click of Harold's office door swinging open, his voice slicing through the usual buzz with a tension that hadn't been there the day before. Evelyn, my office now. The floor went quiet. Eyes darted, half hidden behind monitors, while conversations trailed off mid-sentence. No one had ever heard Harold speak like that. Not to me. Not to anyone. I rose slowly, brushing a crease from my blazer, and walked across the floor like I wasn't walking into a confrontation but toward a final page already written. As I stepped inside, the door closed behind me with a gentle click that sounded far louder than it should have, and for a moment Harold just stared at me. His face, always confident to the point of smugness, now held something unfamiliar. Doubt. The printed resignation letter lay on his desk like a challenge he wasn't prepared to answer. His voice, when it came, was quiet but laced with disbelief. "You're resigning?" "Yes," I replied simply, folding my hands in my lap as I took the seat across from him. "Effective immediately." He blinked, his jaw tightening. "This is sudden. We didn't even talk about this." I smiled, not out of spite, but out of some deep and weary understanding. We didn't talk about Amanda's promotion either, but here we are. His face shifted, a flicker of guilt replaced by something more familiar. Rationalization. "It wasn't personal, Evelyn. She just outperformed you." "In 3 months?" I asked, not with anger, but with a calm so sharp it sliced through his words. "That's what you believe?" He leaned forward, hands steepled. "You know I value you. You've been a cornerstone of this team for 5 years. I don't want to lose you." I held his gaze, letting him feel the full weight of his own absurdity. "You don't want to lose me," I repeated slowly, "but you had no problem mocking me at a table full of colleagues. People I've mentored, guided, carried through deadlines they wouldn't have survived without me." And then turned to me with a smile, as if a pat on the back could replace the recognition you promised and then gave to someone who doesn't yet know what she doesn't know. His composure faltered. He ran a hand through his hair and leaned back, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe I mishandled it. Maybe I made a mistake. But quitting like this, Evelyn, this isn't the right way to respond. It's emotional. I chuckled softly, not out of bitterness, but because it was so perfectly predictable. If this had been emotional, Harold, I would have stormed out the night you humiliated me. But I didn't. I went home, I thought, I planned, and I made a choice. This isn't about emotion. It's about dignity. He was quiet for a moment, and then, with a defensive tone creeping back into his voice, he asked, "So what's next? Going to work for a competitor? You know you're under a non-compete." I shook my head slowly, allowing the smallest smile to form. "I don't need to compete, Harold. I've already moved on." His brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" I took a breath, not to compose myself, but to savor the moment. "Do you remember Malcolm Carter, the CFO you forced out last year because he challenged your ideas too often? The one who carried half this company's integrity on his back?" He stiffened. Of course he remembered. Malcolm had been a problem, not because he failed, but because he had standards. "He reached out to me a few months ago," I continued, voice steady. "He's building something new, something real, and he wanted me to lead operations. I turned him down at the time, because I was loyal to this company." Harold sat back, pale now. I leaned forward just slightly, voice dropping into something that felt like justice. But Friday night changed that. He looked like someone trying to process a collapse in slow motion. "You're joining Malcolm?" "I start next week," I said simply. He exhaled, sagging in his seat. "Evelyn, come on, be reasonable. This company is your home." "No," I said softly, "it was my cage." Then I stood, and before I reached the door, I paused. "It's strange, isn't it?" I said without turning back. "How people only recognize value when it's walking away from them." And then I left, not just the office, but the version of myself that had waited too long to be seen. The Monday after I left Harold's office for the last time, I stood in front of a glass building downtown, sleek, understated, and alive with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. Carter and Bell wasn't a giant yet. Not in size, not in reputation, but it was building. Deliberately, intelligently. And Malcolm had offered me not just a title or a paycheck, but something far rarer. Trust. As I stepped through the revolving doors greeted by warm nods and firm handshakes, I felt a sense of belonging that wasn't based on tenure or titles, but on the quiet confidence that comes from being chosen for your substance, not your silence. My new office wasn't grand, but it had a door I could close, sunlight that spilled across a wide oak desk, and a nameplate that, for once, didn't feel like a lie. The first few days passed in a flurry of introductions, onboarding and strategic meetings, yet nothing about it felt performative. People listened when I spoke, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely valued the experience I brought. During my first leadership session, Malcolm turned to me, mid-discussion, no ceremony, and said, "Evelyn, I want you leading this next phase of operations. You've done this before, and frankly, no one else here sees the big picture quite like you do." That was it. No negotiation, no hoops to jump through, no subtle suggestions to prove myself one more time. Just recognition, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted because it's already understood. As I dove into the work, reshaping internal workflows, reconnecting with former vendors, and stabilizing project pipelines, I began to feel something I hadn't in a long while. Excitement. Not the hollow adrenaline that comes from fighting to be noticed, but a deep, steady flame that burned from within. I was no longer reacting to being overlooked. I was creating something that reflected who I truly was. And the ripple effect came quickly. Just 2 days after my departure from Halcyon Dynamics, I received a message from Rachel, one of the few colleagues I had trusted during my time there. "Evelyn, you won't believe it. Harold's falling apart. No one knows how to handle the systems you built. Amanda's overwhelmed. The client teams are scrambling. It's chaos. I allowed myself a quiet, measured smile. I hadn't said a word to anyone after I left. I hadn't sent warnings or made threats. I didn't need to. My absence was speaking for me now, louder than I ever could have in that old boardroom. Later that week, another message arrived from Rachel. 3 clients have already called looking for you. They're furious you're gone. They don't trust the replacements. One of them, Dawson and Carter, asked if I knew where you landed. Said they'd follow. It was surreal. Not because I didn't believe I had value, but because I had grown so used to it being dismissed. I had always told myself it didn't matter whether they noticed, that doing good work was its own reward. But now, watching those same clients voluntarily walk away from a company that had taken me for granted, I felt something even more powerful than vindication. Clarity. By Friday, I was in the middle of reviewing strategy proposals when my assistant popped her head into the office. "Evelyn, call on line 1, Dawson and Carter. They say they want to talk about moving their account." I took a moment, straightened the stack of papers in front of me, and picked up the receiver. "Evelyn Sanders speaking." "Evelyn," the familiar voice of Mark Dawson came through, warm and certain. "I heard you've joined Carter and Bell. I think it's time we talked." Within days, 3 of Halcyon's top-tier clients had reached out, each with the same message. Things weren't working the way they used to. They missed the structure, the clarity, the calm confidence that had once come with my involvement. I wasn't stealing them. I didn't need to. They were leaving of their own accord, not because I had promised them anything, but because I had already delivered, time and time again. And meanwhile, Harold, once so sure of his grip on the company, was scrambling. Rachel's updates came like chapters in a slow, deliciously unfolding novel. Amanda's drowning, Harold's furious, the board is restless. They had an emergency meeting yesterday. Investors are demanding answers. They're begging the leadership team to stabilize the accounts, but no one knows how to do what you did. I didn't respond to most of her messages. I didn't need to. Every update confirmed what I had already known. I was never just a cog in their machine. I was the system they built everything on. And now they were discovering what happens when you remove the foundation and expect the roof to hold. That Friday afternoon, as I was finishing up for the week, my inbox pinged again, this time from Harold himself. Subject: a proposal. "Evelyn, I'd like to discuss a possible arrangement. If you're open to a conversation, I believe we can find a mutually beneficial path forward. Looking forward to your response. Harold." I stared at the screen for a long moment, the corners of my mouth curling ever so slightly. It was a strange thing, seeing desperation dressed up as diplomacy. And I let it sit for a while before crafting my reply. Subject: a proposal. Harold, I'm available for a brief meeting Monday at 10 a.m. Let me know if that works for you. Evelyn. There was no urgency in my tone, no hint of regret or longing. I wasn't going to that meeting to be swayed. I was going to watch him squirm. Not out of cruelty, but because he had finally been forced to see the very thing he once refused to acknowledge. I wasn't lucky to be there. He had been lucky to have me. When I walked back into Halcyon Dynamics the following Monday morning, it was not as an employee, not even as an equal, but as a living reminder of everything they had lost. The same glass walls that once boxed me in now reflected the flicker of uncertainty on every face I passed. Even the receptionist, who used to greet me with robotic cheer, hesitated as if unsure whether to smile or apologize. I didn't blame her. The office had changed, not in its furniture or lighting, but in its atmosphere, which now carried the dense, invisible weight of regret. As I made my way to Harold's office, I noticed heads peeking over cubicle walls, eyes quickly looking away as I met them, voices dropping to whispers. Amanda still seated at what had once been my place on the leadership ladder, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face pale, her posture tense. She hadn't looked me in the eye that day, and perhaps that was for the best. I wasn't there to settle a personal score, and whatever shame she felt now belonged to her alone. Harold's office door was ajar, his posture already strained as he stood to greet me with the kind of smile that belonged more to habit than sincerity. He looked worn, the dark circles under his eyes deeper, the crispness of his shirt just slightly undone, like the illusion of control had begun to slip through the seams of his suit. "Thanks for coming in," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, the same one I had sat in just days before when I resigned. I lowered myself into the seat slowly, folding my hands in my lap with practiced calm. "Of course," I replied, my tone as level as the steady tick of the wall clock behind him. "I won't waste your time," Harold began, voice tight with a rehearsed professionalism. "We need you back, Evelyn, and I'm willing to make a serious offer to make that happen." He leaned forward then, listing titles, bonuses, authority, and flexibility. Things he once claimed didn't exist or weren't the right fit when I had quietly asked for them long before any of this unfolded. It was almost theatrical, watching him try to rebuild a bridge he had set on fire with his own hands. "You'd have full decision-making power over operations," he continued, "and a seat on the executive committee will match anything Carter and Bell is offering." I let him finish, not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted him to speak every word, to hear them himself and realize how hollow they sounded. "Let me ask you something," I said quietly. "If I hadn't left, if I hadn't forced your hand, would any of this have been on the table?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his silence filling the room with a truth louder than any admission. I studied him for a moment, this man who once held the keys to my career and wielded them with the ease of someone who believed they were irreplaceable. "I gave 5 years of my life to this company," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "And when my moment came, you not only gave it to someone else, you made a joke at my expense, in front of a room of people I trained. And now that everything's crumbling, now that you're desperate, now I'm valuable." He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "You have history here. Relationships. This is where you've built your name, Evelyn." "No," I corrected gently. "I built my name. This company just benefited from it." I stood, smoothed my jacket, and turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to look back. "You told me to take notes, remember? Maybe now it's your turn." Then I walked out for the last time, not with bitterness or pride, but with peace. The kind that comes from knowing you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. Back at Carter and Bell, the energy was different. There was movement, momentum, clients arriving faster than we could onboard them, names from my old life now reaching out with quiet urgency. Within the span of 2 weeks, 4 major accounts had transitioned to us. Not because I lured them, not because we promised them the moon, but because they trusted me, because they had seen how I operated when no one was watching. Rachel kept feeding me updates like pages from a crumbling novel. "Harold's panicking. Amanda can't handle the load. She's making mistakes, and the team doesn't trust her. The board's livid. They're pressuring him to clean up the mess, but no one knows how." And then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, came the message that marked the final chapter of that story. "Rachel, Harold's been fired. The board forced him out this morning. It's over." I stared at the text for a long moment, not because I was surprised, but because closure has a strange stillness to it. I leaned back in my chair, sipped my tea, and felt, not victory, not vengeance, but something better. Relief. He had thought I was replaceable. Turns out he was. And me? I was finally where I was always meant to be. The following Monday, I returned to Halcyon Dynamics one final time, not out of curiosity or courtesy, but because I had agreed, with full intention, to meet Harold face to face. I wasn't walking into that building as a former employee seeking reconciliation, nor was I there to settle a score with dramatic flair. I walked in as someone who had nothing left to prove but everything to remind him of. The glass doors parted with their usual hiss, but the lobby no longer felt familiar. The receptionist's posture stiffened as I entered, her polite nod laced with nervous recognition. I could feel the shift in the air, the way people turned away just a moment too late, their hushed conversations rippling like a tide receding. To them, I was no longer Evelyn from marketing ops. I was the one who had walked away, and whose absence had started an avalanche. When I reached Harold's office, he was already waiting, seated stiffly behind the same desk where he once dismissed me with a smile. His appearance had deteriorated further. Cheeks sunken slightly, tie loosened just enough to betray his tension, and fingers tapping restlessly against a leather-bound notebook. He stood as I entered, offering a handshake that I accepted with professional indifference. "Thank you for coming," he said, attempting warmth, though his voice betrayed how badly he needed this meeting to go his way. I sat across from him, legs crossed, hands resting calmly in my lap, offering only a neutral expression that gave him nothing to work with. "I won't pretend the last few weeks haven't been difficult," he began, clearing his throat. "The transition has been more disruptive than we anticipated. But we believe we can correct the course, and that begins with the right leadership. With you." He leaned forward then, as if proximity would make the offer more appealing. "We're prepared to reinstate you at a senior executive level, give you full oversight of your department, and offer a significant compensation package. The board is fully behind it." I waited, letting silence stretch just long enough for him to start doubting himself, then spoke with measured calm. "Let me make sure I understand this. You're offering me a position I asked for years ago. One you told me didn't exist or that I wasn't ready for. Now, after losing clients, staff, and control of your own company." He shifted in his seat but tried to recover. "I'm acknowledging that mistakes were made, but this is an opportunity to rebuild. Together." I nodded slowly, my tone steady but pointed. "Tell me honestly, Harold. If I hadn't left, if your investors hadn't pressured you, if Amanda hadn't failed, would I be sitting in this chair? Or would you still be feeding me praise in public while undermining me in private?" His lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was written across his face. "You didn't value me when I was building the foundation of your success," I continued, "and now that it's crumbling beneath you, you want me to patch it back together. That's not leadership, Harold. That's desperation." His expression darkened slightly, but I could see the flicker of panic behind his eyes. The same look I had once worn in private, questioning my worth, swallowing injustice in the name of professionalism. Only now the roles had reversed. "Be reasonable, Evelyn," he said, a hint of old arrogance bleeding through. "You've got history here. You know how things work. Do you really want to walk away from all that?" I stood then, slowly, smoothing the lapel of my jacket, not in dismissal but in closure. "What I built here was real, but what you gave back wasn't. And I won't spend another year proving myself to people who only notice when I leave." I turned to walk away but paused just before the door. Then, without facing him, I spoke softly, echoing the words he once threw at me like a casual jab. "You should take notes, Harold. Maybe next time you'll recognize the people who keep your company standing." Then I left, not with fanfare or applause, but with the quiet triumph of someone who no longer needed either. Back at Carter and Bell, momentum had turned into something more powerful: stability. Clients had not only followed me, but referred others. Our operations department was growing, our influence expanding. And in a quiet moment that Friday afternoon, as the sun began to pour gold across my desk, Rachel's name lit up my screen one last time. "Rachel, just heard. Harold's out. The board forced him to resign this morning. They couldn't stop the losses. It's done." I read the message once, then again, before leaning back and letting out a quiet breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I simply smiled because the truth had done what my anger never needed to. It finished the story for me. He thought I was disposable. Turns out I wasn't. He was. And now, for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not because someone opened a door for me, but because I learned how to build my own. It's strange how peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare or final words spoken in anger. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a morning sunbeam resting on your desk, or in the soft knock of an assistant handing you fresh coffee with a smile that says, "We're glad you're here." That's how I knew I had finally arrived. Not at a destination marked by a title or corner office, but at a life I no longer had to explain or defend. At Carter and Bell, things moved forward, swiftly, intelligently, collaboratively. The team respected one another not out of obligation, but out of shared vision. And for the first time in my professional life, I wasn't fighting to be heard. I was invited in, trusted, encouraged to lead without pretense. When we launched our first full-scale operations overhaul, I didn't need to raise my voice to steer the room. I only had to speak and people listened. Clients kept coming, not just because of my track record, but because they could sense the difference in how we did business, with integrity, consistency, and a kind of quiet excellence that didn't need to be advertised. It was more than just success. It was validation that I didn't have to become someone else to be valuable. I simply had to stop giving pieces of myself to places that didn't see the whole. And what about Amanda? She stayed at Halcyon a while longer, though not in the role she had been promoted into. From what Rachel told me, she eventually stepped down, overwhelmed by expectations she hadn't been ready to meet and disillusioned by the culture she thought she'd thrive in. I never wished failure on her, and I still don't. She wasn't my enemy, just another person caught in the machinery of a system built on appearances over substance. I hope she finds her own footing one day, the way I finally did. As for Harold, last I heard, he'd taken an advisory position at a smaller firm on the East Coast, far from the city he once ran with unchecked confidence. Whether he learned from what happened, I honestly don't know. And it no longer matters. Because revenge, in the way the world defines it, was never the point. I didn't need him to fall in order to rise. I just needed to stop waiting for someone like him to validate what I already knew to be true. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight harder for a seat at the table. It's to build your own table with better chairs and better people around it. It took losing what I thought was everything to finally understand I had only been scratching the surface of what I was capable of. So to anyone out there listening, maybe you've been overlooked. Maybe your years of loyalty have been met with silence. Or maybe you've poured yourself into a place that keeps asking for more without ever saying thank you. I want you to know this. You are not invisible, and your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. Sometimes walking away isn't the end, it's the beginning. If this story spoke to something inside you, if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Drop your thoughts or your own story in the comments. You never know who it might inspire. Because here, on the Underdog's Revenge, we don't just tell stories, we reclaim them.